The coronavirus is the biggest threat this country has faced for decades.
This afternoon, we're announcing new guidelines for every American to follow.
Hundreds of people are dying every day.
Coronavirus has affected millions worldwide. Life is now a lot harder for people who suffered from pre-existing conditions. This film will look at the stories of 3 people who are just trying to survive with autism in lockdown. ASD, also known as autism spectrum disorder, directly affects 700,000 people in the UK alone. As a spectrum disorder, no 2 cases are the exact same. Typically, people with ASD have difficulty with social communication, sensory issues, and lack of routines. Meet Adam, a friend of mine. He was diagnosed with Asperger's, a subset of ASD, when he was just 8 years old. In your opinion, does being Aspergic make the lockdown harder?
Yes and no. I've kind of got to shape certain parts of my life around other people now, which has been difficult to get used to. I think it does, in the sense that routines have been completely flipped on its head. It all depends on sort of the further on the spectrum you are, it's going to be harder. I definitely don't think it's helpful.
What coping mechanisms do you use, and are they helping you?
Finding things that make me happy and sort of make it feel like normal. So talking to sort of same people that I usually would throughout the year, every day.
Adam is just one of many people with ASD struggling at the moment. Another is my delightful sibling, Kier. Whilst Adam got his diagnosis when he was 8, Kier was only identified as autistic 2 years ago when they turned 20. One aspect of life that Kier struggles with is understanding facial expressions and processing other people's emotions. This has been made even harder by the lockdown and being forced to see the same 3 people every day for weeks.
I have to process interactions differently. Body language are things that other people would pick up on quite easily, like facial expressions. I just don't get it. If I'm looking out for people's movements and stuff, I have to be paying really close attention, and I kind of have to know that person well to understand what that means.
I feel like you've mentioned before that you are more in tune to me and Mum. You can understand our facial...
Yeah, so there's a misconception that people with autism don't understand feeling at all, they don't have feeling, which is not true. We just experience it slightly differently. People with autism are inherently empathetic people, just in a different way. In lockdown, it's the constantly being aware of it. So as I said, I'm always tuned towards you, 24/7, so I've always got a part of my energy going towards that. By being aware of it all the time, it takes a toll on my mental health much faster than it would normally.
I don't think people realise how difficult it is to live with autism, whether you yourself have it or a friend or family member has it instead. When I wake up, I don't know how Kier's feeling in the day, and that will affect my entire behaviour because one thing I say could be the wrong thing and it can trigger a meltdown. And I think the worst part of living at home and being enclosed all the time with my family is having to watch Kier have meltdowns. Your natural reaction is to hug them or to comfort them in the way that you would want to be comforted, but if anything, that's just going to make it worse. Every family is experiencing lockdown differently, and whilst Kier is fighting an inward battle, 5-year-old Matthew is loving spending more time with his family and working on his speech therapy. Do you feel like the lack of routine for your son has affected you?
The fact that we're all in lockdown and everything else is cancelled means we can actually zero in and do a lot more work with him, and we've actually noticed a lot more progress since we've been able to do that. So it's been it's one of the silver linings, if you want, of all this. And the speech has actually come on an awful lot. He wouldn't have been very good at conversing and asking questions or asking for things, but we've noticed a lot more that he's able to actually ask us for things or tell us that something's wrong or tell us that he wants something. So yeah, that's been one of the benefits of it.
Speaking of the future, are you worried about possible long-term effects of the lockdown, so being inside all day for him?
I suppose the only thing you'd be worried about is he hasn't really seen any friends or any of his friends. He kind of went to a local dance class. It wasn't really a dance class, but it was more of a sort of a children bonding things. He did different exercises and different things. So stuff like that, he's not really be able to take part in. So it's the social aspect, I suppose, of not being able to interact with kids, which he struggled with a bit. But he enjoyed company, that kind of way. But he wouldn't have been great with maybe playing games and all that kind of thing with other kids. But just to have them around, he always mentioned other kids' names. He obviously was quite fond of them, and they were quite fond of him. So that's the only aspect that at the minute is that we're annoyed that he's not being able to enjoy
What are the positives of the lockdown for you?
The positives of the lockdown are that people are being more used to working online, people who never would have tried it before. Previously, people with disabilities have asked companies for leniency with regards to how they need to work. So there's some people that they'd do much better work if they didn't have to go into the office every single day, if they could work from home. And previously companies have just been like, we can't do that for you. And it's obvious now that it's not that they couldn't, it's just that they couldn't be bothered. So knowing now that those functions are in place should hopefully in the future make it so that it's much easier for people to get those amenities.
My whole street have really united. Also, just loving the free time to get to try and exercise. There's been a good few positive things, and I do my best to focus on them.
You know, there was a time when people maybe didn't really understand what autism was, and it was almost like taboo, maybe because people didn't understand it. But we've been pleasantly surprised with the amount of support and encouragement we've gotten.
With such a range of stories, it's difficult to say whether lockdown has been an overall good or bad experience for people with ASD. One thing's for sure, for Kier, it only gets more difficult as each day passes.
My main problem with my autism itself, I can handle that. It's the comorbid things that come with it that's the issue, which is, for me, depression and anxiety. So those are a direct result of having autism, which is the thing I think a lot of people don't realise, is that just by having autism, you are much more likely to have other conditions, which can also be like OCD and paranoia, that sort of thing. In some senses, I'm lucky because it's only depression, but the autism heightens those things. Yeah. So I'm very concerned that I will get into a depressive spiral and end up in a really bad place that's going to take me a long time to get out of again. I'm trying.
One thing I'm worried about with this lockdown and the forced enclosure is that it'll trigger a regression and they'll fall back into that dark place again. I'm trying to make it very clear that I'm there for them and I'm here to support them, but I don't always understand what Kier needs, and I'm really worried that the lack of support they're getting at the moment will mean that there'll be an inevitable fallback. Unfortunately, I've seen their emotions plummeting and meltdowns increasing, and I'm really worried that I'm going to lose Kier to that place again. For these three people, it's not just about adjusting to a new way of life in lockdown. Adam is struggling with no physical contact, Kier is fighting depression and anxiety off every day, and little Matthew is missing out on his formative years and prime social development time. The lockdown may end this summer, but for these three it won't get any easier afterwards. Adam, Kier and Matthew are three very different people with three very different experiences, all connected by one common factor.
If you've met someone with autism, you've met one person with autism. We're all different people. We all need different things.